WoW Killer is a production of amove.tv. Check out amove TV for many more podcasts, multiple about Blizzard games. And for more of Taliesin's WoW coverage, check out Taliesin and Evitel on YouTube and twitch.tv. What are we but slaves to this podcast torment? I'm Garrett, here as always with Taliesin for a new episode of WoW Killer.
Wow, it is you, Garrett. I thought with that intro it was William Shakespeare. I thought, wow, this podcast has gone up market.
It clearly has. It clearly has. For the video audience, I would like to point out, Taliesin, pre-show graphic is still up. Still up.
Oh yeah, you're right. It is. Sorry, God, that's going to mean
nipples.
absolutely nothing to people listening, which is the preferred way that our audience consumes this podcast. Sorry about that, guys.
It is the highest metric, but for the podcast audience that might be wondering what the hell we're talking about, Taliesin puts up bat nipples from, what was that, the Bruckheimer Batman film or something like that?
The famous bat nipples. Yeah, that's our pre-show graphic.
Nipples. Yeah, because if you don't watch the show live, we have spent a surprising number of pre-shows talking about Batman.
It's weird, isn't it? It's weird, but it's always an incredibly focused conversation, always very worth listening to, and most people learn a lot. That's why we get so many people coming in for the pre-show.
It's a good just random hangout. Oh yeah, and Green Day. Chat room is mentioning Green Day. We talk about Green Day a lot. Rancid has come up a ton because it's a shared mutual interest of ours musically. And,
basically, it's like if podcasts had really existed in the 1990s, that's what it would have been like.
Are you saying we're a mediocre K-rock talk show?
Yes.
From the 90s?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure.
We look like it. We sound like it. I mean...
Oh, dude, look at me today. I mean, I am Florida AF. I don't actually feel particularly great today, so I'm super comfortable because I wore a nice collared shirt for you, Taliesin. You may have noticed I swapped out of it because I was sweating so profusely.
Yeah, I did notice,
Yeah, it ain't happening. It's hot in Florida, and I'm day 2 into my COVID vaccine, so I'm having some side effects.
What side effects are you having?
A horrendous headache and apparently overheating a little bit.
Wow.
So.
Well, I mean, we've got nothing on this podcast that's going to help with that because this week, Garrett, on the WoW Killer podcast, we're going to do something that we've been threatening to do since this podcast was first conceived and founded and started. So it's long awaited in that sense. We keep threatening to do this, and then we keep chickening out of it because we know it's going to be an absolute mess and shit show. And that is our Sylvanas episode.
Yes, we've batted about this idea that one day we should just sit down and have a long chat about the character of Sylvanas, going all the way back to, I think, maybe episode 2 or 3 of this podcast, because when we started it, we were still in BFA. I was still not particularly stoked with the whole burning of Teldrassil and
well, this is really interesting, because I feel like one of the reasons why we've never done this episode is because we're both aware that we both have quite strong feelings on the character of Sylvanas and how it's been done. Okay, so here's the thing, a little bit of background. Me and Garrett didn't know each other before we started this podcast. We'd never met, we'd never spoken. We just put our names into a big hat full of other white men in their 30s who might want to do a podcast, and we picked out each other's names, and that's why we do a podcast together. That's how most podcasts work. So we started, and it turned out, after a little bit of talking, it turned out that we obviously had very different views on Sylvanas, and we were like, well, no, let's avoid any confrontation. Let's not touch on that subject for a little while, because, little snippets of conversation about Sylvanas would happen here and there, and it would get quite heated, even in those little moments, of talking about Sylvanas, and we were like, well, there's clearly a whole episode to be had here on this laser-focused podcast. So let's wait until the right moment. And by the right moment, we kind of meant, content lull. And here we are.
I mean, it turned out we had much easier and more well-adjusted conversations about religion and politics. We just had to get those out of the way because they were actually easier than the conversation we're going to have about the character of Sylvanas.
Exactly, and it is a very emotive subject. I would say it's probably now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Garrett. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but I would say this conversation is likely to be less heated now than it would have been if we'd had it a couple of years ago.
I agree, because Shadowlands has definitely kind of thrown Sylvanas into the beginning of an arc, of a new arc. Like, we can kind of see the trajectory. We have a pretty good idea of where Sylvanas is going to land on the other side, which is, you say content lull, I also go, what is the big lore boot I'm waiting to drop when we do get new WoW content? And for me,
you've linked it into the show so much better than I did. You can tell that you're a professional podcaster and I'm some joker off the street. I mean, you're Clearly. Right. I mean, like 9.1 is coming on the PTR in, well, if Blizzard to be believed, which they definitely are always, then it's going to come in like a week. And, you know, part of the 9.1, whether it's in the PTR at first or not, I mean, it won't be at first, is the new raid, which the final fight of which, if Blizzard are to be believed, which they definitely are, will be against Sylvanas Windrunner. And Steve Danusa has come out and been like, you know what, at the end of this raid, oh man, nothing will ever be the same again. It's gonna mess stuff up. It's gonna be like some major lore. It's gonna be cray, and you're gonna want to be there and you're gonna want to see it. And I'm like, yeah, Steve, I do. And you know what that means? It means that when you know, obviously raid testing doesn't happen till later. Obviously, even when raid testing does happen, I've got a feeling they're going to be keeping Sylvanas under wraps, and certain story elements of Sylvanas under wraps, because it's clearly something they want to reveal like on the day of the raid's launch or something. But you know how these things go when Wowhead get their like pickaxes out and start data mining. There's probably going to be some voice lines here and there that come out, and some text lines and some dialogue that come out, which give us some pretty strong hints about where the Sylvanas story is going to end up at the end of 9.1. So it seems like, yeah, now would be the perfect time to have our Sylvanas conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I've calmed down a little bit. I think I can have a more civil conversation, and this is where someone will smash cut you and I screaming at each other later on in the episode. But
people don't like it when we do that, Garrett. People don't like it when we argue. People don't like it when we're mean to each other. You big wanker.
Okay, ass. You have such better insult words in the UK. I'm like I don't know, like we just hey F you buddy, like that's kind of it here
I'm
in the
walking
States.
Here.
It's a lot of learn to drive, asshole, with the middle finger out the window. It just doesn't work. We're not driving. Yeah.
Something quite defined about it. I like it. Well, most of the words I use in everyday conversation, I wouldn't even dream of using on a podcast. So
fair, same. So how far back do we want to go? Do we want to like just kind of lightly touch on Sylvanas before she died?
Yeah. Let's you know, like opinions will come later. Let's you know, but the Sylvanas Windrunner is obviously a one of the S tier World of Warcraft and indeed Warcraft characters, right? She is one of the faces of the franchise and of the universe. Of course, she only popped up for the first time in Warcraft 3. Whereas other Windrunner sisters appeared earlier. Alleria appeared in Warcraft 2. Am I correct about that, or am I completely wrong?
I believe that is the case. This is from memory, though, because I don't have Illyria notes up in front of me, and I didn't play Warcraft 3.
You didn't play Warcraft 3?
Or sorry, Warcraft 2.
I was about to say, like, everything that I believed about you as a Warcraft player was about to get blown out of the water and proved a complete lie.
Yeah, sorry, no. That is, I think I've told this story on the show before. The entire reason I got into Blizzard in the first place was in high school art class. Someone brought in the Warcraft 3 art book, and I was like, "This is amazing!" And I went out to Target that night and bought a copy of Warcraft 3.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty sure Illyria showed up in Warcraft 2 because she had to, because that's when she goes through the dark portal with Khadgar and gets stuck.
Definitely with Khadgar and Tyrallion and all the rest of it. Yeah, so they are all in Warcraft 2. And that leaves the way free in Warcraft 3 for her sister, Sylvanas Windrunner, who very famously, is holding the line against Arthas and the Scourge invasion, and falls. And Arthur eventually, she does lots of kind of, aha, we've destroyed the bridge, run away. And Arthas is like, oh, I order, and chasing after her. And then she's like, aha, we're in the trees now, in your face, run away. And he's like, no, I gotta get her. And then he gets her. And then she's like, okay, finish it. And he's like, what? After the merry dance you've led me. It's not that the writing literally isn't this good, actually, in Warcraft. The writing in Warcraft 3 is kind of terrible, actually, the dialogue.
It's very point A to B.
It really is. But he says something along the lines of, after the merry dance you've led me, Sylvanas, no, I will not allow you to a swift death. And he raises her as a banshee. If the Warbringers cinematic, the Sylvanas Warbringers cinematic is to be believed, that's directly after she's just done a rather ill-advised knee slide towards him, with arms out, having slashed people on either side with her twin blades, thus exposing her chest to the Frostmourne.
It's a very dog actually caught the car moment. It's like, well, now what do you do with it?
Not great rangering there, Sylvanas.
It's not.
You let your guard down. It looked very cool, but
before we go too deep down the Arthas rabbit hole, because I almost wanted to start there, and then I was reminded, and some may have called this a retcon, but in her live days, that's when Nathanos was brought in.
Oh, right, yeah.
Before she died.
My word. Okay, yeah. Well, Nathanos was a member of, like, the cool Elf Ranger gang, right? And he was the only human being who was ever allowed to be in the cool Elf Ranger gang.
Some might have called them the Farstriders.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what they might have called themselves, but for me, they'll always be the cool Elf Ranger gang.
Well, that's the translation. Farstriders translates from Elvish into cool Elf Ranger gang.
Totally. Like, super army soldiers. That's what SAS stands for.
Was it 2 humans, some elves, and a love story?
Yeah, and of course, because Nathanos is a human, obviously the Windrunner sister fell for him, because that's what Windrunner sisters do.
They have a type.
They fall in love with humans. Like, I've said this before, but guaranteed, like, if there was one Caverns of Time dungeon that I could add, or Caverns of Time questline that I could add to the game, it would be to go back in time and rescue, like, you would go back in time as a human, as a male human, and, like, because you know how Caverns of Time changes your race and stuff sometimes if it doesn't fit with the timeline.
If it's a race that wouldn't have been
so like
a
Crowley
player.
would be like, you've got to go back and stop something bad happening. So you'd be like, yeah, okay, and you go back and you become a male human, and you're in Silvermoon, and you rescue, like, you see in the field there's like 3 young Windrunner sisters, and they're like, they're kids, they're just playing, like hula hoop or something, and like doing elf stuff, and it's the Windrunner sisters, but like, kids. And as you watch, you're like, well, what's the thing that I have to stop happening? And then this big, like, I don't know, ogre or whatever, or like a cobalt or something comes out of the forest, and it's like, oh, yummy elf kids for me to eat. And the elf kids are like, oh no, like, we're highly skilled combatants, but we are still only kids. We don't stand a chance. And then you run over and you kill it, and you're like, oh, I'll rescue you, young elf kids. And then the young Windrunner sisters are like, wow, that human male was so heroic. And then you go away again.
Okay,
and that's where the seed was
now
planted that makes the Windrunner sisters be obsessed with human males.
See, I thought they were going to be adults, and you're going to walk up and a Mass Effect dialogue wheel would show up, and it would just be the Windrunner dating sim in the Caverns of Time.
No, that's the new mobile title. But no, this is laying the groundwork for the Windrunner sisters kind of like all falling in love with humans.
So you want to go back into Caverns of Time and like be the bat that Bruce Wayne sees before he becomes Batman? Like, okay.
You managed to turn it to Batman again. Well done. That's actually really well done.
Hey, on brand. But yeah, no, it's I like when we decided we were going to talk about this, like I was like, yeah, we'll probably just skip ahead and just talk about when she was killed by Arthas and Reyes. I continue to forget that they have introduced Nathanos into Sylvanas's living portion of her story, which is really still pretty light, even as many times as we've kind of gone back and revisited it in newer expanded Warcraft lore. But yeah, it's like Maris Stead gets dropped multiple times in some of the stories mentioning Sylvanas' time with the Farstrider. She used to just go there and like chill, hang out. That's how she got to know Nathanos, and he's a little important. I'm sure will maybe come up once or twice in today's discussion.
And there's a case that early Sylvanas, alive Sylvanas, it's not really much of a case, is like the only real Sylvanas. The only time we've ever actually seen Sylvanas in game was in Warcraft 3 when she was holding the line against Arthas. Everything else we've seen ever since is someone else's version of Sylvanas in a way. Because when Sylvanas does get killed and then raised by Arthas, she's not Sylvanas anymore, right? She is a Banshee. She's a different thing. She's not, she's a different being. She's been forced into Undeath by Arthas and by Frostmourne and what have you. So those moments in Warcraft 3 where Arthas is chasing after her, all across like the land essentially, and she keeps doing things and running away, that's Sylvanas, and that's the only time in game we've really ever seen her.
Yeah, before she becomes the Forsaken leader that we knew her in early World of Warcraft, and eventually War Chief, and eventually secondary big bad to the jailer now. But
and like when she was first raised as a Banshee, she had no free will at all. She's something we forget. She was literally bound, and controlled. And it was only when all the nonsense happened with Illidan and Arthas in Northrend, when Illidan was up there kind of trying to melt Northrend, that the kind of Arthas's grip as Lich King on the Scourge started to loosen, and those further away, like Sylvanas and the Lordaeron Forsaken, that's when they started to gain kind of autonomy, was because like the Lich King's power on them and grip on them had slipped, and that's where the Forsaken come from essentially.
Yeah, I don't think I'm realizing this now. I've never noticed it before, but because I'm thinking about like what Sylvanas was like when she was alive. She's kind of just a Legolas surrogate. She's just an extremely adept warrior. And so
she's got like a cheeky side to her as well. Like there's as much as Warcraft 3 can manage, there is like a battle of wits going on between her and Arthas, right? So she's kind of like almost like a Spider-Man kind of character as well. She's not just like proving a thorn in his side, but she's being a little bit sassy with it as well. And she's kind of like, aha, why don't you get me? I'm over here. No, I'm not. I'm over here. No, I'm not. I'm over here. And like there is a slight element
this
of that.
Bridge. Oh, the bridge is gone.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. It's like so that and there's a reason why Arthas raised her, and it was pure cruelty and spite. It wasn't because here was a great ranger who could be of good service to him. It was nothing to do with her power level or her skill or anything like that. It was literally because she pissed him off. And it was he had done such a good job of annoying him and getting in his way that it was out of pure spite. So you could say that Sylvanas, Windrunner the Banshee, was born out of spite in the first place, and it's Arthas's spite that caused her to become what she is, which is quite a poetic way of looking at it. I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's really kind of been what her kind of modern or post WoW launch arc has been. It's been really kind of focused on that. So before we go down that line, we should probably take a quick break, Taliesin, and do something we haven't done before, which is thank a sponsor. And today's episode is sponsored by ExpressVPN.
And that, Garrett, is why Colin Baker is the best Doctor Who.
I don't know about that, Tally. I've been watching the latest season. I'm rather enjoying Jodie Whittaker.
Excuse me, Garrett. One, I don't care about your opinion. Two, how are you watching the new season of Doctor Who with Jodie Whittaker? Because I know for a fact that you live in America, and I know for a fact you don't get Doctor Who on American Netflix, and you're not allowed to watch BBC iPlayer because you don't have a UK address, no matter how much you ask if you can use mine.
Boy, those are some extremely specific concerns. But here's the thing, Tal. You're aware of like VPNs, right? When you want to protect yourself and your privacy and your security online.
Garrett, I have no idea what you're talking about.
That's why VPNs are famous. But the thing I found out recently is that I can use VPN to access movies and shows that are only available in other countries. Over the weekend, I used ExpressVPN to binge watch Doctor Who on UK Netflix. It was super simple. I just fired up the ExpressVPN app, changed my location to the UK, and boom.
Can you also get BBC iPlayer on that? Because that is for British taxpayers only.
Yeah, it works with BBC iPlayer. Yeah, it works with Hulu. It works with YouTube.
I am disgusted. We need to get rid of VPNs. They are wrong.
I mean, you can use it too. There's stuff on our Netflix here in the States that you can't get in the UK.
I find that incredibly hard to believe, Garrett. Our television service in this country is far superior to any in the world. There is nothing you can watch that I can't.
Actually, yeah, Garrett's right. There's a ton of stuff that you can't watch in the UK that you can watch in the US Netflix.
Like what?
Like Django Unchained.
We watched Django Unchained last week.
Yes, we did, because we have ExpressVPN.
Garrett, we've already got ExpressVPN. It's brilliant.
Well, that's great. Well, our listeners can get it too. If they visit our special link right now, they go to expressvpn.com/wowkiller, they can get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. It's wonderful, listeners. Support the show, watch what you want, and protect yourself at expressvpn.com/wowkiller.
They'd be idiots if they didn't. That was an advert.
That was. I'm actually really stoked. We got sponsors. Thank you everybody for listening. Because of you, this is possible. So seriously, go check it out. Just visiting the link will help. Go check out expressvpn.com/wowkiller. But let's return to Taliesin like Sylvanas did to her own body in Lordaeron. To the Sylvanas discussion.
Did you just Wowpedia that?
I did not. I said let's return. Realized the bit, and there we go.
Very good. Oh my goodness, you are the pro in I mean, everyone knows it. Everyone knows you're the pro in this relationship. I can't even play an advert without it echoing on my OBS apparently. So.
We'll fix it in post. Enjoy, and I hope the podcasters, the podcast listeners are really enjoying our breaking the fourth wall. Talking about how the sausage is made today for things that will be fixed by the time they hear this.
Yeah, exactly. Oh god, we're terrible at this job. But yeah, so let's go back. Let's go back to Sylvanas. I like that idea, that thought that just crossed my mind as I was explaining it. That she was born out of Arthas's spite, and now we know, and this is why this conversation is probably going to be a lot more civil than it would have been if we'd had it during BFA. Now we know that. The tragedy of Sylvanas is twofold, because you have the tragedy of Sylvanas, who was killed and then brought into Undeath by her murderer Arthas, and then when she eventually gets her, not revenge, because it's not her that kind of kills Arthas, although just by being a member of the Horde she is a part of it. When she's finally free of that kind of albatross around her neck, as it were, and she tries to end it all by throwing herself off of the top of Icecrown. Now we know that that's when she comes into contact with the jailer and actually realizes she can't even enjoy the afterlife because the jailer's got other plans for her. So her entire story, now we know, is about a complete loss of control. And not being in control of herself, and so there's a time in between her gaining some kind of autonomy in Warcraft 3 up into the end of Wrath of the Lich King, where she's probably at her purest in her Banshee form, where she has the most kind of autonomy and free will, because after that, Cataclysm onwards, again she now knows that she can't even escape to the afterlife or anything after that, which is another tragedy, and probably goes some way to explaining her actions post Cata. But
so would you say from vanilla World of Warcraft to the end of Wrath of the Lich King, Sylvanas is living her best, I would say, life, but living her best Undeath?
Yeah, her best Undeath. We see her in Warcraft 3 living her best life, and we see her from WoW vanilla up until the end of Wrath leading her best unlife. Yeah, absolutely.
It's an interesting thought. Yeah, it's because so much of we talked about just minutes ago about how they've been kind of retroactively filling in plot points from Sylvanas' life, and they've been doing the same for kind of points during that we played through, that we saw if you've been playing World of Warcraft since the very beginning. And I would expect we'll get even more of that kind of filled in, because the realization that she met the jailer and has had some sort of contact with him since the fall of Arthas as Lich King is new. We didn't know that until Shadowlands.
No, we had like obviously like the revelation about the jailer is a retcon in the sense that when the short story was written where she throws herself from Icecrown and then sees only darkness, and like terrifying kind of the reality of what she would have to live through beyond the veil and stuff like that, and how there would be no proper afterlife for her, and how she's a slave to all of this. That was there from the End of Wrath. That was in that short story.
And the mentions of seeing only darkness, like that, Arthas says that before he dies, and it sure seems like that's just it is now in a way retconned, which I don't say is necessarily a bad thing. I kind of use it more as a term of they're now building upon something that wasn't fully explained in the past.
Exactly. And so that's the best kind of retcon. It doesn't actually so much change anything. Like, I have no doubt it was never the plan that the jailer was that, originally, but they filled in some gaps that were left there by the previous writers and made it make sense in a way that doesn't actually change what happened. Which
so I take it now with the information that we have now from Shadowlands as it's because Arthas was whisked away by Uther directly to the Maw, and post that point that it still hasn't been explicitly explained, correct? Unless I'm missing something from a campaign that I didn't play through. It still hasn't been explicitly explained that like that is where the schism happened, is when like Arthas was chucked into the Maw, but it sure kind of seems like that's the point.
Yeah, it seems like there's something going on there. But then there's also a suggestion that just the existence of Frostmourne and the Helm of Domination has something to do with the jailer as well. The suggestion from Shadowlands and the Torghast campaign is definitely that he captured the Rune Carver and kind of either forced the Rune Carver to make the Helm of Domination or learned how to make the Helm of Domination from the Rune Carver, and then somehow found a way to get it into our world, which is the thing that terrifies Devos in the Afterlife cinematic. So
right.
The jailer was growing in power before that, and had found a way into Azeroth before that, if the Afterlives is to be believed, and the Torghast campaign as well. I'm sure it'll all get explained incredibly satisfactorily, and there'll be no complaints about it at all, and it'll make perfect sense. So I trust that.
Someone earmark this and also smash cut to this to the weekly reset when they do a shit show. When you do a shit show comment compilation of everyone being angry about when this is fully explained in the next, I don't know, end of raid cinematic possibly.
Yeah, exactly. So, oh my god, can you imagine if the end of the 9.1 raid is just like Sylvanas getting yoinked off by some smoke? Like,
that means something very
we
different
finally
here in the
defeat Sylvanas, and Danusa's words echoing around everyone's head. We're like, nothing will ever be the same again. It's gonna change everything in WoW. It's gonna be like the most amazing thing you've ever seen. And this coil of black smoke, just like like purpley smoke, I should say, just unfurls from the floor and like just grabs and lifts Sylvanas up, and she's like, oh, and then she's like, oh, and gets yoinked off into the darkness. And then the jailer's like, the jailer's eye shall be opened. And then it's the end.
That's all they're going to do. They're just going to use the same line from BFA, but...
Well, it worked so well there, and everyone was so happy with it.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they?
Yeah,
hey,
dude,
man, if it ain't broke...
I can't wait till 9.3 where we get to watch a cinematic of a tower crumbling. It'll be a good time. Same angle, same camera shot. It's just a Torghast instead of an obelisk.
Yeah. And as people are correctly pointing out in the chat, that is exactly also what happened to Kel'Thuzad at the end of the Venthyr and Maldraxxus campaigns. Yeah, when we were fighting Kel'Thuzad, he's all like, "Oh no, you got me!" And then the jailer's like, lots of black smoke appears behind him, and some more swarm come out, and they're like, "Oi, Kel'Thuzad, jailer needs you. We yoinking you out of here, mate." And they do. They yoink him right out.
Just the jailer, like, "I got you, fam." Get on out of here.
Yeah, seriously.
Get on out of here.
But that does, so, like, rather cleverly, I think, because I think this is a retcon done absolutely right. With the whole jailer appearing to Sylvanas after Icecrown and things like that. I think this is like an example of a retcon done exactly right. It kind of enriches the lore that we already knew, and kind of fills in gaps that had been left in the original story in a way that doesn't that doesn't betray or really change anything from the original story, and actually just makes for a richer, fuller experience, and kind of makes you go ooh, and informs the action that's happening now when the retcon was devised. And I think that's brilliant. I think but it does kind of change our view on Sylvanas and what she becomes like post Cata. But you played WoW at a much higher level than me, from vanilla to Wrath, Garrett. So what, in those years before Icecrown, what did Sylvanas kind of mean to you as a character? What was she?
I think this is where I filled in gaps that were kind of just ambiguous by nature of Sylvanas not really being in the spotlight in kind of WoW's early years. She was just kind of, I mean, for the longest time, she was a Night Elf model, for crying out loud.
It's funny how Sylvanas' popularity as a character did kind of really take off when she got her own incredibly scantily clad model. It's like Sylvanas was there doing her thing. People were like, "Yeah, Dark Lady, watch over you, whatever." And then suddenly she gets her own model, and that model is basically just a woman wearing some string. And suddenly she becomes this really popular character. What do you think it was that really resonated with the young teenage boy audience of World of Warcraft that made Sylvanas
get me to
so
like
popular?
admit that I'm like kind of thirsty for elf models? Like, is that what you're trying to get at? Because I mean, I am. But no, I always thought Sylvanas was cool. I mean, before I even really like remembered, because for the longest time, I don't even think I connected the dots. You know, I played Warcraft 3, thought that was really cool. But, you know, before Blood Elves came in, my Horde alt was an undead, because I just thought they were rad. It was super cool to like be playing as undead, and you know, back in that day, you know, it was you know, a little emo mall kid. I loved it.
Totally.
I wanted to
Undercity was
Mohawk,
legit,
wanted to hang
man.
out.
Like Undercity was one of the coolest capitals as well.
Yeah, because back, like I wasn't a big WoW lore nerd. Like the only character I really knew and gave a shit about was Arthas, and honestly, I'd already forgotten about Sylvanas. So like when I was leveling up my undead alt, because I was playing Alliance back in vanilla. And I remember like having to go like to the Lordaeron, well, not Lordaeron throne room, but the Undercity throne room where Sylvanas hangs out, like just being like, wait a minute, why is the undead leader a night elf? Like that was where my brain. I just thought that was cool in its own right, because my main was a night elf. I was like, oh hell, why there's got to be something here, and start digging. You figure, oh damn, it's Sylvanas from Warcraft 3. So even before she, frankly, she got sexy. I liked Sylvanas before she was sexy.
Dude, Sylvanas was always sexy. What are you talking about?
Hipster here. Okay. Let's just go with that. So yeah, no, I've always thought Sylvanas was really rad, and like I remember getting the robes of Arugal for what is it, Shadowfang Keep, I think, where that drops, and that was what Sylvanas used to be, like a pale skinned night elf model hanging out in the robes of Arugal before she got her own model. And yeah, I just always thought it was so cool that this monstrous undead rotting decaying race was led by an elf. And like before I even started kind of becoming a Warcraft lore nerd. And then the more I kind of started playing Horde, and then, you know, Blood Elves came out, and eventually Sylvanas got a proper model, and I started learning more and more about like proper WoW lore, and learning who the High Elves were, and when they became Blood Elves and all of that. Sylvanas just became more and more fascinating to me. And of course, massive Arthas fanboy. So going to be a fan of this character that literally exists as we know her because of Arthas.
Sure.
It's just, I mean, there's just so much like everything angsty 16-year-old me loves in fiction in Sylvanas as a character.
I think you bring up a good point there, as like maybe accidentally in describing Sylvanas's popularity there, even before her sexy model, is that she was one of the most direct links to Arthas, certainly in the Horde, and like Arthas being one of those major characters that people really related to is the wrong word, but he being one of the most popular characters coming out of Warcraft 3, and still today, you know, like, obviously he wasn't in Vanilla, obviously he wasn't in Burning Crusade, but Sylvanas was, and you had this direct link to the old game, and to this character that everyone loved through her. True, she absolutely hated him, but it was a direct kind of through line, and I guess the Alliance had Jaina for the same kind of feels.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Arthas casts a long shadow, and I enjoyed Warcraft 3 so much that my hype for World of Warcraft was to like see what happened next in that arc, and I had to wait for the second expansion to really see much, but you're absolutely right, and Sylvanas is still here. She's still, I mean, it's probably the second most notable character in Shadowlands at the moment. Like, we're taking the fight to the jailer, and right, one notch down is Sylvanas.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily, like, in terms of status, maybe, yeah, but I mean, you can easily make a case that she is, in terms of narrative, probably the most important character, because so much sort of like hangs off her and what have you. So
yeah,
sorry,
I was going to say she's always I've always looked at her as sympathetic, because of the whole like how she became the character that we know her. Like, Arthas literally like tormented her and forced her soul into subjugation, made her wage war on her own homeland, and eventually she was able to get back control of herself, and take some control back. And the more I played Horde, to kind of talk from another kind of overarching, just being a WoW nerd and playing the game perspective, I really started to understand, like, it was cool to like feel like you're playing the bad guys, but you're like realize that you're not like you just have a different, like, if you're playing Horde, you just have a non-traditional worldview, right? Like, and that's always what's been kind of neat about Warcraft. It's like you've got humans versus orcs, but the orcs aren't just mindless monsters. They're
I wouldn't say it's even an untraditional worldview that the Horde have. I'd say it's like they are on the outskirts of society that doesn't accept them. So it's not even that they have. It's just that, I mean, they are basically oppressed peoples, right? They are. Yeah. So like I feel like it's even more simple than that. It's not that they have an alternative worldview and so they've gone off to build their own thing. It's that the world wasn't welcoming to them. That's
true. Maybe what made it unique is that they actually did have a traditional worldview. Like, you took what we normally look at in fantasy as like monstrous characters and races, and made them like have the same desires and drive as what we would normally traditionally look at as the good guys. Like, the orcs just want a place to live and whatnot, as much as the humans, as much as the elves, and so for me, like, nothing exemplified that more than the literal monster race, undead skeletons raised from the damn dirt that are walking and talking and hanging out. So I just thought that was, like, to me, nothing better exemplifies kind of like what is unique about playing the Horde than the Forsaken.
Yeah, and I think the Forsaken really nails that the best, because obviously, like, the orcs did come over as conquerors, and there's the thing where they were under the influence, they were literally under demonic influence, right? So they weren't themselves, they were kind of possessed to a certain extent. So it's a less simple argument to make for them, which is why Blizz had to add the whole like internment camp thing, to kind of give us a bit more sympathy towards them and allow us to see orcs treated badly and what have you. Whereas the Forsaken get to skip all of that, because they are literally humans, Lordaeron humans, who we see in Warcraft 3 getting routed by the Scourge and getting murdered and getting the city overthrown, and these are the people that you were playing as and protecting in Warcraft 3, and then suddenly World of Warcraft comes along and we learn that, I mean, these people are still here, they're just Forsaken now, but they've been completely forsaken by their fellow humans. So and we see them still have control and humanity and what have you. And so it's very, very easy to feel sympathy towards the Forsaken in the first 3 Warcraft expansions, I think.
Yeah. And I think because of that, I always looked at Sylvanas as, I don't know, a sympathetic leader of the Forsaken. And again, I think this is somewhat me filling in, but it just kind of felt like, her allying with the Horde and everything. It was kind of like with the Forsaken's best interest in mind. And then her, fast forward to kind of the beginning of Legion and her fighting alongside Varian because of a greater threat. I kind of looked at her like, oh, cool. Sylvanas is coming into her own and becoming like a good leader. And if you don't see where I'm leading into, I think this is why I felt a lot of abrasion with the burning of Teldrassil.
Well, I would argue that there was a very marked change in the character of Sylvanas before that. And that's like from the beginning of Cataclysm onwards, we see like a push from Blizz to very much portray Sylvanas in a different light. We have the short story where she goes through an experience which you would expect to change her, and which does change her. She's finally free of the existence of Arthas. She tries to end her unlife. She realizes she can't because of what waits for her on the other side, which we now know is the jailer, and her teaming up with him at that point, sort of. And then from Cataclysm onwards, I mean, the very famous scene in the leveling in Cataclysm where she is using her Valkyr to raise the dead and create new Forsaken, and Garrosh is there saying, well, what's the difference between you and the Lich King now? And she says, oh, well, isn't it obvious, War Chief? I serve the Horde. And you see her in like the Worgen campaign there, telling the orcs that she won't be using the Blight, but she does plan to use the Blight. Like, she's become incredibly ruthless by Cataclysm, and already there are signs that she cares very little about doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well, the morally right thing.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
She's happy to do the strategically right thing.
Yes, I guess. I suppose.
Like strictly like trying to win a war.
Raising more undead and Forsaken isn't even the strategically right thing to do, because what you're doing is you're alienating your allies in the Horde, and like just you're setting yourself up as a force that should be kind of resisted in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's where I start to. Like, I guess as a fan, dislike the arc Sylvanas starts to take, right? Because I used to look at her as like a sympathetic leader of the Forsaken as a people, and they definitely start to take Sylvanas in a direction where she's now looking at her own people as essentially fodder for her war. Because it certainly seems like she's raising more Forsaken to replenish her ranks. Not because she's worried about her people dying out, but because she's worried about not having soldiers anymore. And I think nothing exemplifies that more than probably the For the Storm novel.
Oh yeah, which I think is awesome, by the way.
Yeah, I'm so torn on that one. There's so much of that book I really, really like, but it's also like it's like the final nail in the Sylvanas as a sympathetic character coffin for me.
I mean, she's ruthless, from what, as you just described, being like a tactical viewpoint, I suppose. So there's a feeling. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they very much set up the human side of a lot of the Forsaken, which then Sylvanas, for her own reasons, kind of like works very actively against and to disencourage and to wipe out. So yeah, I can see that, and maybe the story could have. I think we'll probably agree this is the story of BFA in general, is that maybe the story could have done more to show us things from Sylvanas' point of view. But then that, of course, that would have given away things to do with the jailer and what have you. So what was the moment when, for you started to get frustrated with what Blizz were doing with the Sylvanas character?
I mean, it really, honestly probably before the storm, even more so than burning of Teldrassil. But before the storm takes place before Teldrassil, yes?
Yes, yeah, it does.
Yes.
So what?
Yeah.
This is really interesting. Before I let you sort of go on with that, because there are other things that happen to Sylvanas before that, right? So we have in Legion the whole. Well, we have the awesome cinematic trailer to Legion where she just turns up and she's helping Varian fight against the undead, which is brilliant. But then you have the Broken Shore cinematics where she is seen from the Alliance point of view to just completely abandon the Alliance. From the Horde point of view, it's a bit more complicated, but also kind of just abandoning the Alliance and allowing them to die and things like that. And then she gets made War Chief. Like, what did you think of all of that?
I was, at the time, I was really stoked, because at the time Sylvanas was probably my favorite character, still quote unquote alive and kicking in it, and like that was so. I will say I was sidebar slightly disappointed with Vol'jin, because I love Vol'jin and I feel like they didn't really do much with him when he was War Chief. He kind of receded into the background. And only came back into the spotlight to get murdered. so I was a little bummed with that. But when Sylvanas got named War Chief, I was like, yes, Sylvanas is my favorite. Woo! I was really excited about the fact that Sylvanas was going to lead the Horde. And so again, I think this is where I'm trying my best to be mindful of. I think I had my own hopes as like a fan. Like I would have really, I think I would have been happy and pleased as punch if Sylvanas was still our War Chief and doing a good job. Like I think I wanted Sylvanas to have kind of a boring story from here on out. I think I wanted her to become War Chief and become a surprisingly pragmatic leader.
So I can understand that. And I think that's what a lot of people wanted. But I guess my question would be, like, what was it about anything that Sylvanas has ever done that suggested to you that she would make a good War Chief and do a good job? Like, was it the stuff in Cataclysm where she was blatantly working essentially against the interests of the Horde?
Well, I mean, was she though? Because I mean, taking the fight to the Worgen, I mean, I don't think the Horde was mad about that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, but like, I mean,
yeah, it's a little selfish and self-serving.
It was clearly set up as being like, Sylvanas is doing her own thing. She don't care about the Horde. Like, she's actively kind of just, keeping stuff secret from the Horde and working for her own means. And that was, I felt like that was very clearly being set up in Cataclysm.
At the time, I don't think I picked up on it as much, because I was like, well, the Horde has Garrosh as a leader. They're warmongering as hell. And so I would think he'd be like, oh, bravo, Sylvanas. Look at how much more of an army we can just like pull up out of the ground. But clearly Garrosh, like they were very obvious with the fact that Garrosh was not down for this.
That's really interesting. So would you say that maybe you were kind of distracted from the kind of the character building that was going into Sylvanas because like you knew that Garrosh was a baddie? Like it was clear, from that point that Garrosh was a bad dude. And, you were kind of, it was almost like a magician kind of showing you one hand and doing something else with the other hand. It's like we had Garrosh very obviously being like an antagonistic force. So it's almost like we didn't notice the shit that Sylvanas was doing, even though it was there in plain sight.
Yeah, even though you had the clear villain being concerned about what Sylvanas was doing, I just went, well, the Horde is warmongering as hell right now. She's just getting on board with the current vibe of the Horde.
Yeah, sure.
Like that was kind of where my brain was at, and also again, I was just like kind of excited. I'm like, oh, she's experiencing Lich King like qualities, which could be cool. Again, if she took it in a different path, but I get it. I see what I'm saying. Like this is, I think I had a fan of the character competing with what the narrative was showing me.
Interesting.
Because I still want like a happy ending for Sylvanas. Like the character has just been so tortured. Although we're gonna get to Teldrassil and to the fact where like I think she's gone past the point of earning that.
Okay. let's get to that then, because our first conversations that we had on this show a couple of years ago was when BFA was in full flow. This is why one of the reasons we avoided this topic for so long was because emotions were running very high about Sylvanas all the way through that expansion, and some of the explanation we've had since has kind of tempered a lot of those feelings, but particularly after like Teldrassil and the first couple of patches of BFA, like emotions were incredibly high. So what was it that made you so angry? Because you definitely were.
Well, again, it was like coming out of Before the Storm, I was like, oh, really? Sylvanas is just like doesn't give a crap about her own people and is just going to slaughter them in a field because they're experiencing like a pull to their former life. Like, you would think Sylvanas of all people would understand that. And I just wanted an inkling of Sylvanas realizing that she's walking down the exact same path as Arthas, on top of a meta feeling, for the love of God, don't just give us another the Horde leader is the bad guy story. But they did. That's exactly what they did. They had her walk down the same path and just genocide the Night Elves, which is what Arthas did to the High Elves when marching through Quel'Thalas. And we found ourselves with just like, it really did seem like Garrosh 2.0 to me. So I was like, I was annoyed in a meta sense. And then I was just like, no, I want to like my favorite character. And they were giving me a lot of reasons not to.
So interesting, because like I had a much less kind of emotional reaction to it in a way. And I actually, Sylvanas not being my favorite character in WoW beforehand, I was kind of able to enjoy her sort of transition to like finally doing bad things. So like for me, not having played Warcraft 3 when it came out, I went back and I played it a lot later for story and things like that. And playing Alliance in my first years playing the game, and so not having really any contact with Sylvanas as a character, for me, she was always someone that was out there, like being presented as someone who is up to some shady stuff and who was out for herself, and who like attacked the Worgen and like committed war crimes then, and all the rest of it. And for me, it was always that thing of, well, Sylvanas is so popular and they want to keep her in situ, so they're never going to let her off the leash. They're never going to let her do the stuff that she should be allowed to do, and the stuff that from my point of view, seeing the character, she would want to do. And so for me, like BFA was quite freeing for Sylvanas in that she was finally allowed to just be bad and be selfish and do those things and have some fun with it as well. And like she did, like those cinematics in the Siege on Lordaeron, just after Teldrassil, where Anduin and his alliance, like friendship is magic gang, kind of go into the throne room, and she's like draped over the throne being sassy af, and it's all a trick, and she tries to kill them, but they escape, and she's like, oh, that's glorious. Like, that's just like, that's good fun, right? And
I'm with you on that. I really rather am enjoying villain Sylvanas. I just didn't love how we got there, I guess. And plus there's like, I don't know how much of the meta conversation we want to get into, which was like the setup for this was like, we're at BlizzCon, they show art of Teldrassil burning, and then do the whole, but why would she burn Teldrassil? They were goading us into fan theories. They knew exactly what they were doing, and we had months to just come up with the most asinine bullshit.
Okay, so here's the thing. I do get that as a criticism. I do understand it as a criticism. And I think it's a criticism I would agree with more if every single one of those kind of fan theories that you're talking about wasn't terrible. Because there's only so much you can do. Like, every fan theory I heard, I was like, oh no, that sounds horrible. Like, oh, maybe Gen did it on purpose to frame Sylvanas. Horrible. Oh, maybe it was Olgoth.
I disagree. I think that would have been more interesting.
No, I think it would have been terrible. Because it's just convoluted and stupid. Like, the fact is, war is dumb. And war is stupid, and people do stupid things, and like people commit war crimes, and that's why one of the reasons war is bad, right? I mean, there's lots of reasons war is bad, but the fact that like war crimes is a thing, which kind of always happens, is like one of the baddest things about war. And like, okay, so
no, let's take this lighthearted conversation about fiction, Taliesin, and let's talk about war crimes.
But no, but that's the thing. And like a little meme we've got on my stream is, because I always say that I just, I think World War II is bad writing. I think like World War II just really badly written. If you approach World War II from the point of view of fiction and the way we criticize wars in fiction, you would say that World War II really badly written. For one,
well, I mean, the main villain dies off screen.
The main villain dies off screen, incredibly unsatisfactory, and that's just so they can keep it open to bring him back in the sequel in like Argentina later on or something. But like the thing I really don't buy about World War II, and one of the reasons I think World War II is such bad writing, is like the Churchill redemption. Churchill is this dude who goes out and he does a genocide and he like starves people to death in India, and like he's a bad dude, man. And then suddenly World War II comes along and suddenly everyone loves him, and he like, he's this amazing guy who just saves everyone and like wins the war and stuff. And it's like, that's just bad writing. I don't buy it. There was no build up to that. There was no build up to like, where does he pay for all the genociding that he did? Like suddenly he just turns around and wins the Battle of Britain or whatever, and like, it's all okay now, and like suddenly he's revered by everyone in the country. I don't buy it. It's really, really bad writing. And don't even get me started on we could invade Britain right now, but instead let's go and do Russia. As if Napoleon never happened. Like, it's just really, really bad writing.
It's a real focus problem too, because then out of nowhere the Pacific gets involved.
Yeah,
it's just like focus on one arc,
exactly,
for crying out loud.
Exactly. Too many characters, not enough focus on a standard, like, on a proper narrative that goes through. Like the war in Europe is like meant to be the big finish, but then there's all the whole war in the Pacific stuff afterwards, which just feels a bit like. And then the Americans commit the biggest war crime of history twice at the very end, and like we're all supposed to think that's okay as well. It's just terrible writing. It's like really, really bad. And like if you approach obviously a genuine war with the kind of criticism that you approach like pretend wars, like it's ludicrous and it's insane. So like what we're learning from fiction is that you can't write fictional wars as if they're real wars, because no one believes them. And no one will believe that someone can just turn around and do something which you don't think they should do, which in reality is what happens in war all the time. So maybe like Sylvanas' actions in Teldrassil are unsatisfactory to us because in a weird way they're too representative of what actually happens in war, is that people do shit which is unforgivable, even if they're your favorite people who you don't think would be able to do that. And like the good guys do that shit and the bad guys do that shit. And I don't think I'm reading too much into BFA when I say that I think that's probably something that they wanted to try and show with the faction war stuff in BFA. And I think World of Warcraft is probably the wrong place to do that, we've now learned. And I think that I don't want to criticize them for trying to do something a bit more ambitious and a bit more, and something new. But yeah, it's probably not the right place. I think Warcraft works better when things are a bit more black and white.
Yeah. Like I said, with BFA behind us and having too much time to think about fictional characters, because that is how I have chosen to live my life. Like I think I realized that at the time it was like it was an equal mix of not wanting another horde leader bad guy, but also I had my own baggage, which is this is a character I really like. I think at the time Sylvanas was my favorite character in Warcraft.
And you certainly weren't alone. No.
Yeah. But it's just like I really wanted to I really like Villain Sylvanas. Like you said, when she's just like kind of sitting side saddle in the Lordaeron throne room, just talking mad smack to Anduin. I loved every moment of that. Sylvanas is a villain. It really works. It's fun, but it's hard to revel in the fun when I'm just like, she just like murdered like 1,000 people. It's difficult for me to just kind of like really get down in the dirt and just be like, oh yeah, I love villains. I love a good villain. Which I do. Like I tend to really like cheesy villains with awesome costumes. Darth Vader is the best in Star Wars. Arthas is my favorite in Warcraft, and Sylvanas after him is a lot of fun. But it's just, I don't know. It's hard to.
Well, is there an argument that Sylvanas, it doesn't quite work in that role because she's not a good villain? Because, like, although she's good at being a villain, there was always throughout BFA that kind of promise that there was stuff unexplained. So you could never quite enjoy her being a villain because you were always like, well, when are they going to turn around and it turns out she's saving us all along? Or when are they going to, like, when is she going to explain her plans and we realize that there was a really good reason for her burning? Like, there was always that vague kind of implication that there was something, it turns out there was something incredibly important that we just didn't understand about Sylvanas' motivations, right? She's got this power from somewhere, really weirdly. Like, she's suddenly massively, like, OP, but there's a reason for it, right? It's not like just, and what is that reason? We just don't know. So you were never allowed to truly enjoy her being a baddie because there was always this implication there was something more going on. So you couldn't ever really truly get behind the efforts to stop her either, because it's like, well, she's just going to turn around and show us that there's a really good reason for her doing what she was doing. And in the same way that you could never really enjoy N'Zoth as the baddie of BFA, you could never really enjoy Sylvanas as the baddie of BFA either. Which is why we need the baddie made incredibly clear from the beginning of the expansion. I've said this 1,000 times, but Warcraft works better when you know who the baddie is. And, like, I know we knew that Sylvanas was the baddie. I know that we knew N'Zoth was the baddie, but we were never allowed to enjoy that. Like, we were never allowed to enjoy either one of them. And
then also, I mean, in BFA, like, so this is also a little bit of a BFA postmortem, which we have an episode about that, by the way.
I think
you
we've
can go
got
back
6.
and listen to. But it was like Sylvanas kind of just ghosted most of BFA. She kind of just disappeared for a large portion of the war campaign, and it just kind of felt like. Didn't we learn this with Burning Crusade? Because I remember the devs being like, "Yeah, we probably should have had Illidan in our Illidan expansion a little bit more," and that's why Lich King Arthas shows up so much in Wrath of Lich King. That was a lesson they learned from Burning Crusade, that it just felt a little weird that you got Illidan on the box, and if you don't go raid Black Temple, you don't see him.
Yeah,
and so, like, I felt that was really weird in BFA. On top of the fact that they just had, like, 2 unrelated storylines. We're like, what's the connection between Sylvanas and N'Zoth? And the answer was absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of weirdness there. And if you ever want to hear me go off on a rant too, I could also talk for hours about how, like, Sourfang just didn't work for me. I'm like, for all the people Sylvanas has wronged, and you're just like, oh, let's have this orc that really had nothing to do with her whatsoever for the last decade be the person that's going to go and fight Sylvanas. I was just sitting there being like,
having someone who didn't have, like, a pre-established reason to be against Sylvanas, I kind of feel, in fairness, I feel was kind of important to the way that BFA played out, because if the person if it hadn't been Sourfang and there'd been a different character in the Sourfang role who did have a reason to be suspicious of Sylvanas or have a grudge against Sylvanas, or who had been wronged by Sylvanas in the past or something, then, like, the thing that everyone said about Sourfang was like, well, why did he go along with this plan? Why did he plan the attack on Teldrassil? Why didn't he walk out of the Horde right there and then when it happened? Like, because he didn't have a predisposed reason to be against Sylvanas. It's quite important that he didn't, for those reasons. Was that, yeah, when you're in a job, like, and when you're in a war and, like, your boss, your general, commits war crimes, like, people don't just down weapons where they are and walk off, right? That happens in movies, but it doesn't happen in actual life. And yeah, it makes sense.
I don't know. I guess I was just really expecting more Greymane in my Sylvanas conflict, and it again kind of just felt like he got thrown on the back burner and forgotten.
Oh, what? Sourfang?
No, Greymane.
Oh, Greymane. Oh, yeah,
like,
yeah.
In this conversation.
True, very true. But then I also think, like, again, you could say the same about Sylvanas in Wrath of the Lich King. Like, the fact that Sylvanas wasn't there for the death of Arthas, like, you could say, well, that's incredibly unfair on that character.
Well, and you have that one dungeon, but if you play Alliance, you get Jaina.
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
get Sylvanas as your guide. So yeah, that's a very good point. Although I kind of remember having that feeling at the end of Wrath of being like, should have been a little more Sylvanas involved in this.
Yeah, and that's just another reason why I think World War II is such bad writing, because like all those European leaders who that we'd seen so much of, in the war, and like we've been told to root for them, and we've been following their story incredibly closely, and then suddenly it's all in the Pacific. We don't even hear from them again. Where was Churchill didn't get his moment in the Pacific.
I really take issue with this line of yours, where you're just like, well, if you compare it to real war, it's fine because real war is written. This isn't real war. It is written, and let's write it. Let's do something with this. What are we doing?
I just feel like it's worth kind of, I don't know, like I just think World War II is really badly written. That's all. I think, the fact that no one can see the build up to it when it's obvious to everyone, the shit that's going down. I just think it's bad writing. I just don't buy it. I just don't believe it.
Well, this brings us to kind of where we are now, which is I'm rather enjoying everything going on with Sylvanas.
Yeah, well, it's amazing what having something explained to you will do in your like understanding of a character, and therefore being able to enjoy it. And I'm certain that well, you know what I think that BFA was conceived as the N'Zoth expansion, and with probably some faction war stuff as well, so kind of like the same level as the beginning of Mists, but when they a year or so later came up with the concept for Shadowlands, and they decided that they had this great idea for Sylvanas, and they needed Sylvanas to be in a certain place for Shadowlands, they decided to give her this huge role in BFA, and this antagonistic role in BFA to get her ready for Shadowlands, which kind of ruined BFA as the N'Zoth expansion. Wasn't fully committed to the war expansion. It's one of the reasons narratively BFA was like so unsatisfactory. And it would have been bad for BFA to have explained all of the Shadowlands stuff then. It would have been bad for Shadowlands to explain all the Shadowlands stuff then. But it does make Sylvanas a much easier character to appreciate and to be able to enjoy, knowing all of the Shadowlands stuff. And what do you think her... Okay, so look. We know that Sylvanas was kind of, in some description, recruited by the jailer at the end of Wrath. So what is her motivation here? What is where she is, like, at the beginning of Shadowlands, so not even quite, not even after a patch like we are now. What is it that drives her? What does she want to achieve? Why is she doing what she's doing?
We're still somewhat unsure, aren't we? You're asking this as a hypothetical / like what is my take on it, right?
Based on what we know and what we've been given, but also hypothetical, I guess, as well.
Yeah, because before we knew of the jailer, we knew about her throwing herself off Icecrown and seeing "quote unquote" only darkness, right? Like, which links to Arthas, who we now know is just tossed in the maw, and it sure seems like, well, Sylvanas may have just been tossed in the maw as well. But now we know that she met the jailer. So I don't know how much of it seems like a part of it is fear of the jailer, of what he is capable of, and maybe feeling like there was no other option. That if this is the enemy, if this is what's awaiting me when I meet my end, I guess I better join up, because what chance do I have? But I don't know. There's also part of me that's like, does she just think this is better? Like if anyone's going to have a unique perspective on death, it's going to be the character of Sylvanas.
Yeah, totally.
She's already done it multiple times before. And that's kind of like, if nothing else, that's kind of been her arc, is like trying to figure out what her afterlife is. What is life after her death? And trying to find that place and find that peace. And just not being able to, right? And so, to me, I now see Sylvanas as this character who's just really been broken down and is kind of devoid of all hope and left with very few other options. And so I think the option she went with was aligning herself with what she saw as an inescapable force. And saying, you kind of like, if you can't beat them, join them type thing. But clearly, Sylvanas is being set up like as someone who is now having doubts about her choices. And so I think my question now is like, well, where do we go from here?
Totally.
Like,
I think what we now know about Sylvanas's decisions and about her motivation and her personal journey up to this point, I think is really interesting, actually, because it goes back to what we were talking about as Sylvanas as victim. Sylvanas is a victim of Arthas, and Sylvanas is a victim of the jailer, and Sylvanas as a victim of Sylvanas as someone who has always lacked control. You know, she didn't have any control over becoming a banshee. She didn't have control over being able to take her own life. She kind of like wasn't allowed to, like even after she was done and she wanted to be finished. And this idea that she would be fertile ground for someone who wanted to plant the seed of saying, look, life and death is unfair. Let's just break it. Let's just, mortals in this reality are the only ones who have to bother with life and death. Like this stupid prison of life and death. Like you live a bit and then you have to live in the realm of death for all eternity. And at no point do you ever have control, and existence is unfair. But you know what? None of the other cosmological forces have to bother with that shit. Like the Void Lords don't bother with that shit. The Light and the Naru don't bother with that shit. Like Arcane doesn't bother with that shit. Like we are the only beings in the cosmos who have to bother with this life and death shit, and we're the only ones that are confined in this prison. Like let's break free from it. And that's what I kind of imagine the jailer's kind of pitch in a way to Sylvanas is. And like Sylvanas would definitely be kind of open to the suggestion of breaking free from this cycle of not having control that she's been caught in, and it's also very, and that for me maybe would explain why she has decided to join with the jailer, and it's also a situation where it really is like you got to break some eggs, right? If you're gonna destroy the very concept of life and death to bring us onto a par with like the rest of the cosmos and the way they exist, then what does it matter if you're killing people? What does it matter if like you're perma killing people in the afterlife? Because you're gonna destroy all of this anyway, because you have to, right? And I think that could be seen as being a noble aim, but isn't actually what the jailer wants to do. Because another thing that we've talked about before is the fact that the jailer has quite clearly explained his plan differently to Sylvanas and to Denathrius. Like Sylvanas and Denathrius have both explained to us, the player, what they think the jailer's plan is, and it's been different in both cases. Like Sylvanas seems to think it's breaking the machinery of death and stopping this injustice, this prison of the cycle of life and death. Denathrius seems to think it's just death taking everything over and ruling all the other forces, and the jailer being in charge, which seems more likely by the way the jailer is going about things. And
yes, and I guess that's the thing is, do you think... I initially thought that Sylvanas got on board because she just was like, well, there's no beating the jailer, let's do it. But it seems to maybe not be the case.
Well, I'm open to that as well, because I think that's absolutely valid kind of take, is again because she's made such a big deal out of killing hope and trying to just extinguish hope, and that's kind of like reflective in her. Like the implication now is, after the Anduin cinematics, that she had to give up her own hope of justice and fairness to team up with the jailer, and she would like other people to not have hope either, so she doesn't feel like such a dumbass for doing it. Essentially, that's what the whole Anduin stuff comes down to. That's why she was so stuck on the idea of winning Anduin over, of his own free will and not dominating him. It's because she moved over of her own free will. It's the one choice she's ever made, in a way, is to team up with the jailer and to like throw her lot in with him. And it's important to her that someone else did the same. And so, like, the tool was there to dominate Anduin, which is what they end up doing. But it was very important to her not to do that, and to prove to herself that she'd made a just decision by having someone who she considers to be just and pure make the same decision. And obviously Anduin doesn't. And there is like it's not so much. So when Sylvanas's kind of turn happens, which I think we all think will happen, like she will turn against the jailer in some way. Now, whether you think that constitutes a redemption or not is another conversation, but like it will be called Sylvanas's redemption, but it'll be a turn. And
I would call it a turn. Yeah, I think she's still, like, because of the crime she's committed, she would need to do a lot to redeem herself.
Well, exactly,
I don't even know really how she could. My brain does go, I have been spending a lot of time saving Night Elf souls from Torghast. So maybe there's something there.
Yeah.
And I think that's still the abrasion I sit here with is just like, there's still the Sylvanas fan in me that like wants her to have a happy ending, but then there's also all the things that this character has done in this fiction in recent years where I'm just like, does she deserve it? Like,
well, I mean, like, it's not so much does she deserve it, it's like, do we deserve it? Do we deserve Sylvanas to turn around and help us? And we do, because we've been wronged by Sylvanas. So like, whether her turning around and helping us would redeem her or not isn't as important to me as like whether it's believable that she does. And
that's a good point.
And like, whereas I believe maybe her kind of preference for breaking the machinery of death would probably still remain intact, the thing that would turn her would not be to realize that the thing she wanted to achieve was wrong or bad, but just that was never really the intention of the jailer after all. To be like, I've been lied to, like, he doesn't want to break the machinery of death, he just wants to rule over everything. It's like, the Russian royal family was pretty bad, and it was probably the right thing to do to get rid of them. Stalin, probably not the guy you wanted to end up with.
So you think Sylvanas was sold a bill of goods and is now realizing that he's
I think
just
Sylvanas has been tricked, and it would be Sylvanas realizing that the jailer is not trying to do what he said he wants to do that makes her turn, rather than like any revelation that, oh my god, no, what we're trying to achieve is wrong. It's like, no, the jailer's lied to me, and like, he's doing this bad thing rather than the good thing I thought he was trying to do. So like, she doesn't shift on what she thinks would be better. Like, she doesn't shift on her belief that life and death is unfair and that it should probably be broken. She shifts on her faith that the jailer would do that. I think that's a much more believable reason for her to shift than the standard, I was so foolish and wrong all along, and
it's a good point. And then there's still the Chekhov's Nathanos.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten into that because it sure does. There's that hanging. We can't even choose who we ...
Yeah.
Like that. I can't believe we haven't talked about yet during this entire conversation. But to me, I think the next words are be with.
But what?
I think the words she didn't finish with are we can't even choose who we be with.
Yeah.
Or who we spend our
I
death
think
with.
so too. A lot of people disagree with me on that.
Really?
Someone in the comments saying, I still find it strange she's joining with the guy that caused her all the pain and suffering. I think that's a really good point. But think about what you would do if you were the jailer and you wanted Sylvanas on side. So you've just had, within the space of...
Well, I think she still looks at Arthas as the guy that caused her all the pain and suffering, not the jailer.
As the jailer, you've had, within the space of a month or so, and time works differently in the Shadowlands, you've had both the souls of Arthas and Sylvanas come popping through the void to you And the void, I use that in human terms rather than Warcraft terms, but like,
oh yeah, I think the jailer could put on his gaslighting hat real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like,
and like,
why
haven't we seen
my
Arthas?
dear dead child?
Why isn't Arthas
what he did
like,
to you?
Yeah, totally, exactly. It's like, I've got the guy that wronged you. I'm going to take care of him. Don't worry. We have our ways of like torturing people down here. I think what he did to you was terrible. Yeah, you're right. It's really bad. He's an example of why death is broken, right? So, here we go. Let's do our thing. And yeah, I think that the jailer is probably using Sylvanas. Like, I don't think it turns out Sylvanas has been chumming up with Arthas in the afterlife and kind of working together just because they're both, down there in the moor or whatever. I absolutely would assume that the jailer has been like using Sylvanas's hatred for Arthas to have her on side by like torturing him or being seen to serve justice against him in Sylvanas's name, sort of thing. I imagine that's a part of why Sylvanas is on side.
I agree. I think he told her what she wanted to hear.
Yeah. And going back to what we talked about last week, how, Warcraft is very much vengeance in Warcraft is usually shown as something which is bad, and a lust for vengeance is usually shown as something which is going to make you fail and come a cropper, and something that needs to be shaken off. I would imagine that Sylvanas's turn, if not redemption, will involve her, dropping her hatred and lust for revenge against Arthas. Because, seeing how Anduin is dominated, this pure soul, this person who we know she considers to be good. It's one of the reasons she doesn't like him. And seeing how the jailer is able to dominate this soul and make him do what he wants might make her think differently about what Arthas did to her. It's like I'm literally watching the jailer dominate a good soul and make it do bad things. That might make me consider why Arthas was doing what Arthas was doing in a different light. I know the way that control over Anduin and Arthas worked from various sources was different, but it might be like the jailer is well up for just controlling people and making them do terrible things. So maybe the terrible things that were enacted on me by Arthas, maybe I shouldn't be placing all the blame on Arthas for those.
I don't know what form it takes, but I'm mostly with you. I think we have to get some kind of reconciliation, and Sylvanas just kind of letting go of her Arthas hate, because this can be kind of, I think, our final little talking point here, which is like, where do you think Sylvanas will end up at the end of the expansion? Which is, I'm pretty sure she's going to replace the jailer.
Interesting.
I think let me put it this way. I think it would be a good place for her to end.
I think it'd be a cool place
if
for her.
If Sylvanas is gonna, like, whether it's a happy ending or not, I think if Sylvanas is supposed to have like a healthy ending, where Sylvanas actually ends having grown as an elf, not a person, but having grown as a character, I think she has to be the one that starts like correctly ferrying souls into the afterlife. I think it would be an appropriate end for her characters to become this new kind of guide into what happens to you after you die.
That wouldn't put her in charge of the Maw then. That would put her in charge of like either Bastion or as like the sorting hat, the Arbiter itself.
Well, it depends on how it all plays out, right? Like what if the path through the Maw is like that damage is irreversible?
Yeah.
I
get where you're coming from, and I think like her having a position in the Shadowlands seems like a fitting end for this kind of arc, and this particular arc. I'm kind of suspecting that we might end Shadowlands in a position where we have no need of the Maw or anything like the Maw, and so I agree with you. I think like the idea that she'll take up a position in the Shadowlands is quite a popular idea and quite a sensible idea. Personally, I'd like to see her just dropped off in Revendreth. Like, I'd like to see.
This is what I want to see happen to Arthas, and I kind of want her to be the one to do it.
I know what you mean. I know. I kind of want to have both of them, really, and which wouldn't be good storytelling, probably. But like, yeah, I like the idea of like dropping her off in you know, she doesn't consider herself to be able to be forgiven for what she's done, you know. So like, she helps us, probably by helping Anduin. And then we're in a position where, you know, the threat is finished or whatever, and, you know, the story is essentially over, and we've got this Sylvanas problem, and it's like, she doesn't consider herself worthy of forgiveness. But then there's that thing of, well, you know, there's literally a place for people like you here in Shadowlands, and it's here. Well, and she's like, well, I don't think they'll be able to help, but and you know, it's not our job to forgive her. It's not our job to watch her atone. It's not, you know, it's the job of Revendreth. And then she can come back in like 2 or 3 expansions or 4 expansions or whatever, and then we can assess the situation then. But the idea of just dropping her off in Revendreth to do what Revendreth does, and try and find what there is in her to be redeemed. So it's not on us or her, really, in the short term. On camera, it's not an on-camera job for her to be redeemed, is what I'm saying, I guess.
That's a good point. That being said, I don't think we're going to put Sire Denathrius in charge of Revendreth.
It's true. But
so in 2 or 3 expansions, right, Sylvanas shows back up.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe she's telling people to crawl to her on their knees, which I will be first in line for that, by the way.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's your hope? Just to finish off, do you think, if you were a betting man, do you think the Sylvanas story is going to end in a way that you find satisfying, or do you think you're going to be an angry man?
I think I'm going to be satisfied. We're in such a huge lull right now, and I know we've talked to death the fact that I think all of us are a little down in Shadowlands right now because of the weight, not because of the quality.
Mm-hmm.
Quality's good. It's just the same for too long. I've been really impressed by the story they've been telling so far. Like, I like to think about WoW writers as our DM, and I've been really pleased with our DMs. I'm really pleased with the campaign that we're now on, and it had a really, really strong opening, one of the strongest since Legion.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we only had one opening since Legion. It was BFA. But you get the idea.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I do think I'm going to be. I do think I'm going to be satisfied. I think I've also, like, a lot of this conversation, I think I've done a lot of just like kind of just getting over what I wanted for Sylvanas and accepting kind of where they took her in a story aspect. And I like where she's at right now. I find her sitting there kind of questioning being in league with the jailer really fascinating and really interesting.
Yeah.
As long as I just don't stop to think about Teldrassil too much.
Oh, I totally agree. And like, I mean, I would say, wow, you know, we're talking about Sylvanas' journey and its many twists and turns, but I just want to show my appreciation for Garrett's journey in all of this.
Oh,
from fanboy to simp to furious, self-righteous story denier to actually kind of being chill with it all, and it's been a joy to see. I'm sorry we couldn't have had this episode when there would have actually been more fighting.
It's one of my it's a thing I've noticed in fiction in recent years. I really enjoy when something that like a chapter that came before a sequel or a new chapter in fiction, like I dislike it, but I like what they did with it in the future. Like,
Garrett. So what you're saying is, like, when you were angry all the way through BFA, basically what you're saying is all those people who were like, well, just wait and see, were right.
I mean, a little bit. I think BFA was still one of the worst WoW expansions. And again, always with our disclaimer, we need to like have this on soundboard. Disclaimer: we both still really enjoyed BFA, but something has to go at the bottom of the pile, and for me, BFA is the second worst.
Fair.
But still had a good time with it. Still, you know, all that stuff. No, I was actually, you know what I think about this is, I clearly liked it so much I don't remember what the hell it was called. But whatever the Alien sequel to Prometheus was, I think Prometheus is one of the worst scripts I've ever seen. But I actually rather enjoyed the Alien sequel to it because it did some fun things with the stuff that was set up in Prometheus. I'm just like, I look at Prometheus, I'm like, that movie is hot garbage. But the sequel's actually kind of fun. It's not a perfect movie, but I had fun with the sequel to that movie because it took up some weird story threads from Prometheus and actually did some interesting things with them.
Yeah. No, my trailer sense tingled when I watched the trailer for Prometheus, and I knew that was a movie I didn't need to see. So I'm completely lost in that conversation. Sorry.
I'm just looking at Just Gut in the chat room. It says, "Thanks, Garrett. I agree. The Cataclysm was the worst expansion as well." No. Like there's one time where I haven't enjoyed playing World of Warcraft. It was Draenor, and that's the worst expansion.
Still blows my mind when people say Draenor was better than BFA. I can't even. Listen, so much of my life is based around the fact that I'm like, listen, judging art and creative works is entirely subjective and there are no truths, but F that. The truth is that Draenor was bad. No, look, it is subjective, and if you think Draenor was better than BFA, then I can't tell you you're wrong, but I can judge you as a person and a human being for thinking so.
Yeah, listen.
And I will.
Yeah, listen, Chavro. I'm not going to bat and saying Cataclysm was high art or anything, but it's.
Having said that, Cata was the only time I ever stopped playing.
See, that was. Well, I've taken multiple breaks over my WoW career, and Cataclysm was one of them. But I was also like moving back to my home state from California. I had other things going on in my life at the time, so. Wasn't really Cataclysm's fault. But I side note, personal note, I remember that's when Randy Jordan left the instance. And because I was experiencing so much personal turmoil, I was super bummed out at the time. I was like, I have no control over my life, and the only thing I can control is this World of Warcraft podcast I like. Damn it, Randy. That's okay, because that paved the way for me being on that show now. Yeah. Anyways, I mean, you're so much more open, I feel like, as a WoW fan to like where WoW goes narratively. Do you think you're going to be satisfied?
I mean, I think
where Sylvanas ends up.
I hope so. I'm not sure if I am more open. I think I've just kind of liked what I've been given more. Maybe, it's just chance that I've kind of been maybe more in a place just to kind of like and enjoy what the story has. For me, the problems with the whole Sylvanas and Jailer and N'Zoth thing was in its structuring rather than the story itself. I never really had a problem with the actual story. I think it was presented terribly and given to me in a very unsatisfactory way, which seems to be something that's kind of like being resolved in Shadowlands. And I think, we're getting to the meat and potatoes of it now. Like, I've given my reasons for why I think it happened in BFA, and I think N'Zoth and Sylvanas kind of distracted from each other. But now we're just being allowed to enjoy all of that and have it explained to us in a way that they were very reluctant to do in BFA. I find it a lot more satisfying. So yeah, I think I will find it satisfying. And, I'm up for being surprised as well. I've got in my head where I kind of like it to end, but I'm trying not to invest in that speculation too much and be disappointed if that doesn't happen. I think like, yeah, I trust Steve Denuza. I think he's a really, really good storyteller and like, cares a lot. And I'm willing to go with it for sure. I think I'll be all right.
Yeah, and I don't feel like the WoW team is inviting us to come up with fan theories. By the way, we're just in a content drought.
Yeah.
And so anything we come up with, that's on us. It's our fault.
I completely agree with you. I think Blizz is very explicitly telling a certain story right now, and they're kind of not keeping. Yeah, they're not hiding their hand really. They're just giving us that story piecemeal. But and there's not much open to interpretation about what they've given us so far. In fairness, like they are giving us a very on rails story in that sense, and that after BFA, where they were inviting speculation, which never really got like the whole of BFA is like the end of Sherlock season 2. Where they're like, how did Sherlock survive the fall? And then Sherlock season 3 starts and they're like, who cares? We're not going to tell you. And it's like, well, F you then. Like, that's the feeling that a lot of BFA gave me, because it was like, oh, what about this? who cares? And it's like, oh, well, I care. You made me care. You asked me to care. You invited me to care. And then you didn't. And so that's what BFA felt like. And Shadowlands does not feel like that at the moment. But a lot will depend on whether stuff is explained and whether, stuff does resolve. I think we need resolution, which is something we never really got in BFA.
I agree. Also, add Tally hates BBC Sherlock to the WoW Killer bingo card.
That you hate it so much.
I like it. I don't care.
I hate it so much.
I love it. This has come up a surprising amount of times. Like a surprising amount of times.
I know. It's like always on my mind because, we talk about narrative and narrative structure a lot on this show. And that leads me to think of like the most obvious bad example of like a TV treating a show treating like their audience like shit. And actively disdaining their audience for reacting the way that you invited them to react. So that's the worst. And Sherlock is the most obvious example and the most relevant example that I often end up at. So that's why I mentioned Sherlock.
I would say that, yeah. End of the show. We're going to get off topic for a second before we end. I'm just going to lean into this Sherlock conversation and say, I agree that like the quality drops off like hell after season 2. So if, as a fan, I would say it is kind of a butt show after season 2. So, there you go.
I think it's cute that it took you until season 3 to realize. But yeah, okay.
This
is a post-show conversation. This is a post-show conversation. This show is about 12 hours long right now. Let's let these beautiful podcast listeners go home and or get on with their lives, and we'll continue this in the post-show.
I do have a question for chat room after the jump, after we properly end the podcast about Broadchurch. We'll get to that in a moment for the live stream audience. Anyways, it's time to put this episode to bed.
Laser focus.
It's the end of it's fine. It's fine on all of my shows. The end of the podcast is when we just start randomly farting off about other things.
Shall I play the advert again?
We could do the advert again. I could start talking to you about Valheim. It would be great. Anyways, folks, right into the show. We have an email address set up. If you want to be a part of our mailbag episodes, let us know what's on your mind. Maybe you want to respond to us about this episode. You could tweet at us at WowKillerCast. You could drop a YouTube comment. But you can also write in wowkillercast@gmail.com. Keep them a little on the shorter side. Have a higher chance of making it onto the program. But other than that, you can find Tally where can they find you, Tally, when you're not doing WoW Killer?
Find me right here, people watching this recording live, on my Twitch channel, Taliesin and Evitel. Find me on YouTube if I ever finish this video I'm working on, Taliesin and Evitel do games. Find me on Twitch with the hot takes, spicy in your mouth, on Twitter, Taliesin and Evitel. What about you, Garrett? Where can I find you?
I'm just recoiling from saying spicy in your mouth, apparently. Garrett Art on Twitter. There are 2 R's and 2 T's in Garrett. Taliesin, who wrote me an email this week and wrote one. No, I was trying to remember what the name of the episode last week, and I went on to your Twitch to see what you named the stream, and you put Garrett with 1 T. There's 2 T's in Garrett. How dare you?
I always spell my stream titles wrong. It's part of my brand.
Yes, totally. And
no, genuinely. It's because I sit there thinking of my stream titles for like a day in advance, and I put a lot of effort into them, but I want to be cool and make it look like I haven't put much effort into them, so I just misspell them a bit.
Nice. Well, folks, you can find me on Twitter on there, and find this and every other podcast that I produce over at amove.tv, AMOVE.tv. Go check it out. That brings us to the end of this episode. We did it. We finally made it. We had our Sylvanas conversation. I have a feeling we'll have another one after we know where Sylvanas ends.
I am spent.
I am as well. And so with that in mind, let's bring the show to an end. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And until next time, good luck and have fun.